All right. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. This is our third convening of the Vermont Agriculture Recovery Task Force. And we're going to kick off the meeting today with just some updates. And this is free form. Roy, I don't know if you have anything to add here, but ultimately I was just going to leave it to, if you have an update to provide from your organization, please raise your virtual hand if you can do so, and we can just go around and collect those updates.
Any updates? Any updates from you, Sarah? I know there's always something buzzing in your shop.
Not that is as specific to ag recovery and resilience as maybe some of my sister agencies. I will just say we are working most closely right now with the Agency of Natural Resources on wastewater, water, stormwater infrastructure, and the FEMA public assistance matching dollars, and working through the requests that have gone from the State Recovery Office to the congressional delegation, and then to my office of the secretary, and then back down to us to figure out what program codes in my agency can be best utilized for some of their work. And I will just say, John, if John and Travis are on the call, happy to include you all in that. I'm not sure if you are having different conversations, but that's the biggest piece of news that we're working on, and we're happy that we can all be here and that the federal government's funded for another month and a few weeks. So.
I know that John wasn't going to be able to make it today, but I don't know, Travis, do you have an update?
Yeah, sure. So I will just share some numbers that we have through two of our programs. So we ran our emergency watershed protection program, and that's the program that where we work with sponsors, typically towns, municipalities, what have you, that will sponsor an activity that may likely addresses a watershed impairment. So debris removal, anything that might be impacting a bridge, removing debris from a bridge or anything like that. And I'll just share some quick statistics that we have. So we had roughly about 75 different sponsors, entities reach out to us for almost 200 sites that have been impacted. We're still collecting the data on what that might cost. We visited about 120 so far, and the estimates already are in the 3 to 4 million. So we're anticipating that we likely will be double or triple that by the time we're done. That's not a traditional program that NRCS runs. It really is only activated during a natural disaster. So we work with entities to get work done on the ground. So anyway, we've got requests coming in. That deadline for the Emergency Watershed Protection Program closes on October 12th. We got an extension that essentially mirrored FEMA and SBA's deadlines for requests for assistance. I will share, I'll move on to our EQIP, our Environmental Quality Incentives Program. We did run a disaster assistance program that just focused on 7 practices: cover crop, fence mulching, pasture and hayland planting, feed management, critical area planting, and the other one escapes me right now. But anyway, we had an application deadline of September 1st. We had around a little less than 200 applications for those funds, for a total of, I think, $7.5 million in requests. Unfortunately, we only had $4 million available, and we were able to fund about 75 of those applications. So we are right now, because our fiscal year ends September 30th, we are actually working with our national headquarters to ramp that back up, to see if we can reach out to those additional producers for that roughly $3.5 million to see what we can do ASAP under the continuing resolution right now. So happy that we were able to get out and help producers. Most of those requests were for feed management. So we're just kind of looking to see what we can do ASAP under a continuing resolution right now. So we were able to respond pretty quickly, but recognize that's only a small portion of the needs out there currently. So that's NRCS's update.
Thank you, Travis. I think that Marley has a question for you. She wants to know if you'd be willing to take questions.
No questions from Marley. Sorry.
Put you right on the spot, Travis. Yeah, even Sarah's shaking her head.
Yeah.
Jeez. Travis, I just wanted to confirm, is it accurate that these emergency payments count towards the $450,000 cap in the Farm Bill? And so the $7.5 million of requests that you received is highly likely far less than what is out there because so many farmers have reached that cap in the Farm Bill?
Yeah, we don't know the statistics. Just because if people know they've reached the cap, they won't reach out to us. But that is one thing that I know. I don't know if anybody hears from the congressional delegation, but one thing that they've talked about is for EQIP, there is a payment limitation for $450,000 per contract under the current Farm Bill. The reason we rolled this out this year is because we recognize there likely will be a new Farm Bill and that payment limitation will reset. We don't know what the Farm Bill is going to do, but Marley is correct that any payment they receive under EQIP disaster assistance will go against that payment limitation. The congressional delegation is currently kind of working through maybe some options where disaster assistance may not go against that payment limitation in future farm bills. But yeah, those are some challenges we had to work through for sure. Great question.
I'm happy to offer a BGAP update if that would be helpful, at least from the ag side. So Agency of Commerce has the $20 million in the Business Emergency Gap Assistance Program, and ag applicants are also encouraged to apply, and those are being reviewed by the Agency of Agriculture. We've received 149 agricultural applications to date. Their total net damages that they claim are over $13.4 million. And we've awarded, or at least have ready to award, meaning a complete application at the Finance and Management 40 of those 149 applications. The program update that probably everyone heard was a removal of the $20,000 cap and an increase from 20% to 30% of allowable uncovered costs to be covered through the BGAP program. So we're now going through applications to ensure eligibility, and new applications were calculating the award based upon 30% of their net uncovered losses, and then we'll go back and make changes and additional potential supplemental awards to those that have already received awards at 20%. So probably another, I don't know, what do you think, Nicole? Probably another month of reviewing applications. The application remains open, so new applications come in each week. So it's not a closed program at this point, and still encouraging farms to apply.
Yeah, I would agree with that timeline, Abby. I think also just, for this group to know, it is a bit of a tedious process to review applications because there's so many things that we're, asking applicants to submit. So we've had to do a lot of additional work on reaching out and getting things, updated or corrected. So that's part of it too. But and I don't know if I just missed it, Abby, but we do have 3 additional people on board to help us in reviewing. So that's been an update since last time. We've got a bigger team now. Liz?
Hey, just a quick question for Abby. I didn't quite catch it. Did you say you think you'll be reviewing the already submitted applications over the next month, or you think that you expect in about a month there will be no funding left, or both?
Those are good questions, Liz. So we over the next month, I think it'll take us that amount of time to review the remaining 149 applications that have not yet been recommended for an award. We've denied 2 applications, so there's some applications that may not move forward to an award. But I think it's going to take us about a month to review the new applications that we haven't yet reviewed, go back and evaluate for supplemental awards, those that were already awarded, but at the only 20% or the $20,000 cap. The hope is that we won't. I don't know if we're going to run out of the 20 million. I think the belief is that if we do, then there's likely an opportunity to go back to the administration and say, here's the outstanding demand that exists within the BGAP program. Are there additional dollars that can be allocated to this need? The increasing from 20% to 30% and removal of the $20,000 cap was based upon an assessment of the applications at that time and the $20 million that was available, and a determination that we could afford to cover those increases. So that worked at the time that the program upgrades were made. But again, as new applications come in and we learn more about each application as we open it and review it, we may exceed the $20 million program cap or program funds.
Thank you, Abby. Eileen, do you have an update? I saw you come on camera.
Yeah, I can get started and Julie can contribute. So we had that whole disaster intake spreadsheet that we'd been going through, and not everybody was interested in particular in USDA programs, but that was the direction that they got, was to call the FSA office and report damage. So by my estimation, there are a little over 400 unique callers on the lists from each of our 9 service centers. And let me just share. We were able to get a jump team of 5 people in from around the country to help us get through this backlog of calls. And they did a great job. They were with us for 2 weeks. Some applications were taken, but admittedly not a lot of applications. But the results of the calls under the potential column. So there's let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5 programs represented on the list here. So our ELAP program, the ECP, EFRP, Livestock Indemnity, LIP, and Tree Assistance, which is TAP. And I've totaled up the calls. So the potentials, I think, are at least what we're looking at for applications to come in, not necessarily the ones that have come in. So ELAP is our big winner for program participation. We think there's about 148 people interested in applying for ELAP. Julie can talk more about that program if anybody wants a refresher on it. Our ECP program, so Emergency Conservation Program, where we can do practices like debris removal, grading and shaping, repairs to fencing, has what we think is probably going to be about 116 applications statewide. Actually, I'm going to say that number is going to pop up once people start hearing that the application period is open, which it is now. These numbers are already a couple of days old. The EFRP program, Emergency Forest Restoration Program, is one that many people who've never worked with FSA would be eligible to participate in. So it's for non-industrial privately owned forest land. And what we're hearing for that program is mostly a lot of road damage. This program hasn't really been run in its current configuration ever in the state. That we've only ever run the program once, and it was 12 years ago, and it looked very different then. So we're still getting our feet under us with working with the U.S. Forest Service and the Vermont Department of Forestry, who will provide the technical support for this program. So just from the calls that we made in our service centers, they determined there might be interest from about 17. But again, when that press release hits the streets, which should be at the end of this week, beginning of next, we expect people may come out of the woodwork on that one, which is a little scary. The LIP program, only about 5 callers or callbacks indicated they'd be interested in that program. And then the tree assistance program, about 6. So we do have a lot of work to be done. There are applications starting to come in. I don't know, Julie, do you want to just refresh people's memory about what ELAP is, since that's our big winner?
Sure. So it's the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program, and the program is primarily based on grazing herds of all sorts of livestock, but that is kind of the string. They need to have some sort of grazing acres and animals to kind of qualify for feed lost, that physically floated down the river or was damaged, for additional, purchases that they need to make to feed their animals through a weather event. And then, of course, grazing days actually lost. There is, a payment calculated if you had to supplementally feed animals that were grazing or had to remove them from the grazing acreage. So there's lots of moving parts under this program that took us a little while to kind of sort out for flooding and excessive moisture. Again, because it's been used primarily out in kind of beef country, I'll say, where they have blizzards and they're out, the animals are out on the range, or that different sort of impact, extreme weather. So we've kind of filtered through that. We are still waiting for if farmers incurred a transportation cost to bring feed in from outside kind of their regional area, which is defined as a 25-mile radius from their farm. We can reimburse $6.60 a loaded mile for transporting the feed to the farm. So we're waiting approval for that, but certainly taking applications and discussing that with people that apply. And honeybees and hive losses are also covered under ELAP. So we have had a couple of hives, bee operations where the hives were set out in various pollination locations that were swept away from rising waters. So that is something that we also can pay for reimbursement of losses for colonies and hive boxes. So there's lots of gyrations under that program that made it a little bit complicated to kind of get it off the ground. And our jump team that was here from 5 different states was, I think, very helpful to kind of get that training and make those phone calls back to farmers to understand what they, how they were impacted and if this program would help or not. I think a lot of people are trying to put kind of unharvested feed under ELAP. That's creating a challenge. If they lost feed meaning they couldn't harvest it. That's really a production loss, and that's something, under insurance, like either NAP or a risk management, crop insurance product. So there's a little bit of a learning curve here to kind of filter out. We know there's a need, but it's a production loss, but not really attributable to that emergency livestock assistance program. So a lot of learning there. The livestock indemnity program falls under my shop too. We did not receive many reports of actual, physical livestock losses, but as that chart indicates, we had a handful that have submitted or contacted us. I think poultry and I think swine were the two livestock categories that we have applications for, but I have not heard of anything larger animal than that. And then lastly, NAP is the non-insured assistance, crop disaster assistance program, which is our coverage that we offer for anything that crop insurance won't provide a crop cover or production losses on. We've had an uptick in that participation. We had kind of a caveat built in on if farmers were certified limited resource, beginning farmer, socially disadvantaged, or a veteran beginning farmer, they may have certified to one of those categories and had kind of basic coverage in place before the storm. So we've had an uptick in policies, I would say about 3 times at this point. We normally have covered at 374 individual crop policies that were a lot of them at the catastrophic level, but it's still something. And right now we have 113 applications for payment on individual crops. So we're very busy in that category, and also trying to set people up for 2024 coverage or of some sort of risk management product, whether it's NAP or we're working with RMA to talk about the micro farm revenue policy that is not really being talked about much, but is a new feature for through crop insurance where there's less paperwork and it's using a revenue of $350,000 and under. So we really want to get some education out there to have that be known, so farmers can make an educated, decision of a risk management product for them that would fit for them. And we have a hold on our funding right now to make any payments due to the fiscal year rollover. So we're kind of getting our ducks in a row that, slowly by the end of the week, we expect some program funding to be kind of restored, if you will, and be able to start kind of making ELAP and NAP payments, CRP, etc. So that's what I have for an update. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Abby just added in the chat another update around the state feed directory that there are currently 100 or roughly 100 entries offering available feed. It could be hay, corn, crop in the field, etc. Some offer delivery, some are in New York or New Hampshire. And I know you all can read, but I don't know if the recording will see the chat, so I'm reading it out loud. So that's one from Abby. Liz, I see your hand up. Liz, if you're talking, you're muted.
Oops, sorry. I just clicked the unraise my hand instead of the unmute. Quick question for the FSA and USDA folks. Just wondering in terms of, I know you said there's going to be press releases coming out, lots more publicity around these programs. are there going to be opportunities for like info sessions for farmers and other service providers to learn and be able to sort of direct people in the right place? Like, what can the sort of service provider community in Vermont do to help people get into the right programs at the right time? And my second part of that question is also around like all the climate money that is also coming to USDA, and are you expecting any sort of backlogs with ability to respond to applications given all this like intense work for you all?
So I can speak a little bit to the press releases. So the press releases in particular were announcing the program implementation for ECP and EFRP. The EFRP press release is supposed to go out at the end of this week. And Keith Thompson from Vermont Forestry has said that he would probably be putting that out on his listservs and contacting the consulting foresters that he has a list of to help get that word out. We don't have any information sessions planned. I don't know if Julie, if you have any thoughts on that. We did participate in an information session run by Vermont Ag that was, I don't think it was widely attended. This last one, I don't know, Abby, maybe you can comment on that, but you know, we were trying to get the word out on our programs there.
I think we did request, I think maybe a week and a half ago, we met with Ryan Patch and Nicole. I can't remember.
Yeah, Julie, it was me. It was me and Ryan.
And we talked about, how can we have another, could the Agency of Ag help us with information sessions so we could kind of get out the word. So now that, again, we're kind of back to work after October 1, we could come back to that. And I think they would be helpful for sure.
Yeah. And in terms of the climate funding, I don't know, Travis, if you want to jump in, NRCS is much more likely to see all of that money, and FSA is likely to see none.
Yeah, sorry. Someone stepped in. What was the question? I'm so sorry.
Liz, if you want to repeat your question about the climate funding.
Sure. I'm not sure it was like a super great question, but just wondering, given the, new programming and increased funding and workload related to the sort of climate stuff rolling out at not exactly the same time, but relatively same time for disaster relief, like, do you have any capacity concerns? Is there anything that I should be telling farmers to sort of look out for as they try to access all of these important programs?
Yeah, great question. Absolutely. I think we have a capacity concern. I think, so just to give you an idea, so we just got these numbers on Friday before the shutdown. So this is just for Vermont NRCS. So I think most of you know that NRCS, USDA NRCS received back in August of, what was it, 2022, through the Inflation Reduction Act, about $20 billion on top of what we normally get through the Farm Bill, through our key programs, EQIP, Conservation Stewardship Program, the RCPP Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and then ASEP, our Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. So those 4 programs over the span of about 5 years will receive an additional $20 billion a year. Just to give you an idea, RCPP right now receives about $300 million a year. In, I think, 2026, RCPP will receive about $2.6 billion a year. So it's an order of magnitude when it comes to the increased work and increased financial assistance that's available to producers. This year, in EQIP, Vermont NRCS usually obligates around $8 to $9 million through our Farm Bill funds through EQIP, what we call EQIP General. EQIP IRA this year, we will receive an allocation of about $16 million. Next year, it will be almost 25 million, and then the year after, projections are around 30 million, maybe even more. So it's a lot, and so we are currently hiring additional staff to get that work done. We're also working with some of our partners out there, the Vermont Association of Conservation Districts, the conservation districts out there, other key partners to increase technical assistant staff who can go out there, work with producers to talk them through kind of what we're calling climate literacy to help them understand what's available to them, and then turn around and develop a conservation plan that addresses some of those climate solutions out there, greenhouse gas emission reduction, carbon sequestration, you name it, as long as it's a mitigation practice, and I can share those with you, it's eligible for a producer. So I don't know, Liz, if that answers your question, but there's tremendous opportunity out there, and we need all the help we can get, I think, to really help producers know what's available, and then working with staff to get that out on the ground. So we think about it a lot.
I'm sure you do, Travis. Thank you for taking the time to say a little more about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we are at
So
about.
Marley's got her hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. This isn't so much an update as just a little bit of an FYI. Our enforcement division at A&R has gotten a couple calls from folks who are concerned about landowners who are removing the sediment from their fields, understandably so, and stockpiling it along the edge of the river. And in many cases, well, there's only been a couple cases, but it's certainly understandable why they're doing this. And in one particular case, they were anxious to get cover crops on the ground, which we certainly all encourage. But I did want to just flag, if you know of folks who are doing this, please try and encourage them to get in touch with A&R and the floodplain managers. And I'm happy to put a link for their contact information in the chat. They very much want to come out and help farmers decide how best to handle these situations. And in one particular case, they've given them 180 days to remove what had been piled along the edge of the river. The idea is to try and work with the landowners and figure out how to not worsen future flooding situations, see if there are any permits that are needed or anything like that. But putting sediments into a berm or stockpiling them along the stream bank is prohibited. So please encourage your landowners to get in touch with us as best they can and work with the A&R floodplain managers to come up with a good solution ahead of time.
I wouldn't want to make an overarching statement, but that removal of stuff might be a fit for our ECP program.
Yep, and I have spoken to the enforcement folks here and made them aware of that, and to get in touch with folks as well to make sure they know that funding's available. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so I have one more written update from Abby, and then if there are any more, we can probably take a few more minutes, but we're a little over time for updates, and then we're going to move on to the workbook. So Abby just wrote in the chat that another update is farmers are chopping corn and making hay these past few weeks. This allows for some farmers to connect with their insurance adjuster and see if they're eligible for a claim. We are hearing that as corn is being chopped, they are testing and finding. Am I going to say this wrong? Go ahead.
The mycotoxins.
Mycotoxins, that's what I was going to say.
Can't believe you bailed her out, Abby. Come on.
Thank you. I'm like, I've said this word too many times in the past couple months that, of course, I'm just going to blank right now. Okay, so any other updates that we want to put out there quickly, and then we're going to move on to the work group and talking about the subgroups. Okay. So the next part of the agenda, we have created kind of a rough framing in Excel of prioritization. So we're going to talk about, I'll bring it up right now, actually, because that would probably be the easiest. So here is the work group that I sent out ahead of this meeting. And we have it divided into 4 sheets. The first being kind of the cover sheet that lists the charge that we had initially identified for this group, which would be identify key priorities through community engagement and subject matter experts. That is you all here. Coordinate implementation strategy proposals that support Vermont farmers in recovering lost revenue and assets. We've all spent time this meeting and the 2 previous talking about updates and different programs that are available out there, as well as positive updates we have, barriers that we've encountered along the way. So we're going to continue to do that and identify strategy proposals. And then communicate critical needs of Vermont food system to state and federal policymakers. That is something that we have been doing and been communicating, and then we will be developing a report based on our conversations in this group, as well as this workbook. So here's kind of the main page where we want to ultimately identify key goals or priorities, as well as gaps that we see, and then communication needs. So this is the main page, and then I want to get into rather quickly so I can kind of get the point across of what we're doing here. We've then divided this into subgroups where we will identify priorities in the subgroups and kind of bring them back to the bigger picture. Before I move on to talk about the subgroup specifically, Roy, do you have anything to add? Because I know we talked pretty in depth about our vision for this.
I think you've covered it. I just wanna say that I know there's quite a few people on the call. I just want to say that I find it really enjoyable to work with you to come up with these ideas, because you're such a innovative thinker. So if I should say anything at this point, it would be that. But of course, this is a task force, and we want to make sure that everybody participate as much as we're able to get you to participate. And so this is these are subtasks that we find essential to the overall goal of the ag recovery task force. That's about it. My thoughts on this.
Thank you. So I'm just going to go through the 3 groups very quickly. We've kind of just given like overarching what we think this subgroup would be focused on. And then from there, I want to open up for discussion if there are any, suggestions or whatnot for this. And then we'll move on to identifying members of those subgroups and kind of what we see as time commitment for that. So the first group would be regulatory recovery team. And in the subgroups, we want to identify short-term priorities and goals, long-term priorities, goals, gaps, progress, and communication needs. And I just want to say, we want to keep this fairly simple. I'm not looking for the groups to identify, 30 different priorities and goals here. I think really focused. I would say maybe 3 solid short-term, 3 solid long-term for each of the subgroups. And then I want to come back together in our next meeting after we've had time to do this and start doing this and prioritize what out of each subgroup needs to be kind of our main priorities. So for this regulatory recovery team, we said identify priorities, goals, and gaps related to supporting farmers' ability to maintain or defer regulatory compliance during and following a natural disaster. So that's the overarching theme of this group. The next group is the farmer empowerment team, which we said would be to support economic recovery, training, and resilience during and following a natural disaster, which I know is quite broad. So happy to take suggestions on specifics for that. And then the last is to identify priorities, goals, and gaps related to current and potential government programs available for the agriculture sector to recover from natural disasters. Again, short-term, long-term gaps, progress, and communication needs. So I realize that this is just an outline and quite simple, but I thought that it would be a good starting point for us. You know, Roy and I talked about kind of the vision. So before I go too far ahead of myself, I'm going to stop there and just hear, and I'm going to stop sharing for a minute so we can see faces. If there are specific suggestions or questions you have at this point. Okay. Oh, Abby.
Yeah, so just to maybe clarify kind of the intent, I think that I'm understanding that this workbook is designed to identify kind of priority actions aligned under the charge of this task force. So we've spent sort of like the first few meetings like gathering information, getting kind of lay of the land, focusing on updates, getting to understand what each other as organizations and agencies and entities have to offer. And now we're starting to move into the direction of what do we do next? What's our coordinated kind of approach, communication goals, recovery needs, etc. And that's going to be organized by these 3 different groups that are going to spend some time thinking and working out goals and gaps, and then bring that back to the larger task force, prioritize, and then then we have kind of like our work plan.
Correct. And the work plan will be used ultimately to create the report from the task force, which will contain recommendations.
Right.
That's another important detail, I think. Yeah, what happens? There's like the work to be done, but then there's also the report that's expected and potentially need for resources or whatever. Okay, thank you. I'm kind of feeling like Eileen, I think this morning that like I need it like in simple terms so that I understand what I'm doing next. But thank you.
Marley.
I guess I was wondering what you folks think about how broad you want us to go in each of these subgroups in coming up with ideas. Do we truly think out of the box and you know, perhaps recommend something that might be very difficult to do and requires some major changes? Or do you encourage more realistic approaches, things that can likely happen? I'm hoping the former and not the latter, but obviously some balance between the two. Just curious if you've given that any thought and have any thoughts for us in the subgroups.
I think we gave it a lot of thought, and we talked about exactly what it ought to look like. Ultimately, we don't want to have too many ideas that it becomes difficult for us to handle, but we didn't want to restrict you from thinking outside the box at the same time. Whatever you bring to the fore, we will bring it up, but we'll discuss it before we get to the point of a final report.
I agree. And I think that the subgroup time, I would like to at least identify today which group you would like to be a part of and a point person for those groups to be able to schedule some time and move forward that way. But I think that the subgroup discussion, Marley, would be a really good place to kind of put your out of the box ideas up there and use your subject matter expert colleagues in that group to kind of talk about ultimately if that idea is going to make it to being a top priority or a top goal.
I also had another question. Obviously, capacity and time is an issue for everyone on this call, but I can see cases where someone might want to participate in more than one subgroup. Is that allowable? Do you have any preference on that?
My preference being that I know that we all have a lot of time commitments at this moment. My preference would be to focus on one. And if there are specific things that you would like to provide feedback for in another, I would say try to do that in writing. And I don't want to immediately put you in one, Marley, but I assumed that you may be in the regulatory group or may volunteer for that. So that's what I would say is I want to keep open communication. And I feel like you can definitely communicate thoughts to any subgroup, but I would prioritize one and stick to one. And I think as far as time commitment, I would love to have each subgroup have a meeting virtually and just kind of talk about it. But I think a lot of this can be done through shared documents and email, and then kind of bring it back together in this group in November.
Yeah,
So,
Nicole, your comment actually is really what my challenge is. I have no regulatory work at all, but
Okay.
that said, there's no one else from A&R who is on this team to work on that. And I think it's an important thing for A&R to be looped in on. So it's going to be a challenge. So, but all of them obviously are of great value.
There might be a place for that, Marley, when we come back together as a larger group to discuss as we delve into each of those recommendations that we get.
And I would say if there are folks from your organization who are not part of the task force, but you think that their opinion on what you're talking about is something that's really necessary to understand if it's doable, you know, we're not necessarily, we don't have people from every single area of state government or every single area of the agricultural sector that can tell us kind of exactly all the ins and outs. So I think ask your colleagues too. And I don't want to put Nina on the spot here, but I'm going to, but like, you know, Nina is in our water quality division. And so very regulatory, and she has regular contact with folks at A&R as well. So I think keeping you in the loop, and if you have a point person that you want that subgroup to talk with, you could do that, or I'm sure Nina has contacts as well. Sorry, I didn't have a question for you, Nina. I just wanted to kind of tell you I was going to probably have you in that group. Darcy?
Yeah, hi. I don't know which group I would be in, so I guess I don't understand totally what's in each bucket. So I think I would be farmer. I'm with SBA in Vermont Empowerment Team or the GAPS one. So I'm kind of, if you see a Venn diagram between SBA and everybody else, we're like a skinny little piece that we share, I think, with the entire ag world. But in Vermont, because everybody has more than one business, they're a farmer, they have value added business line, and they may have, you know, 3 or 4 other businesses. We are a point of contact, so we can help promote all the programs you guys have. We can better coordinate. We work with lenders constantly that sometimes run both programs. We work closely with VITA, who's got a big ag program, Yankee Farm Credit, and that sort of thing. So I'm not really sure. Happy to be in wherever you put me, but I wasn't totally sure if we're self-selecting, if I was going to do that right.
So I'm looking at Roy, but I was going to let people self-select unless there was a different option. I want to make sure that you get into the group that you would like to be in or that you feel is most appropriate for you. So I'm going to put the names of them in the chat right now. And I'm thinking that that's an easy way if you could just identify in the chat which group you would like to be assigned to. And then I'm going to ask that we identify some point people for those groups that can be responsible for getting that first meeting scheduled. So here's the first one: regulatory recovery, farmer empowerment, and then the last is government systems. So let's just take a pause for a minute, and if you could type into the chat which group you would like to be assigned to, and then we can go ahead and identify point people. All right. Is there anyone who has yet to make a decision? Should we hold for another minute or are we good? Okay. I'm
Those
going to
camera answers coming up.
All right, I'm going to propose a very scientific way to do this, which is the first person who identified themselves in a group. I'm going to ask if you want to be the point person. If you feel like you don't want to do that, then we can move on to the next person. But that would be Liz as the point person for farmer empowerment.
Sure, works for me.
Okay. Julie or Grace for the point person for government systems, but I know Grace was in between farmer empowerment and government systems. Julie, are you comfortable being the point person, or would you like us to select someone else?
I'd like to defer, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and say, and I might get some slack for this, but Steve Collier, will you be the point person for getting something scheduled for government systems?
Can I say no?
You can say no.
Yeah, I can do it, Nicole, sure.
Okay. Regulatory, Nina will be the point person for regulatory. If you're good with that, I'll ask you as well.
I am. I'll just say I'm not sure if anyone else elected to partake in that group, which is maybe understandable, but Marley, I might ask if you're willing to take it on with me. It might just be the two of us, and it might involve some coordination with some of the other regulatory programs, both in Agency of Ag and DEC. So yes, Nicole, I'm happy to get something scheduled and take lead on that. But maybe before we move on, I'll just ask, like, is there anyone else that Marley and I should be aware of in our efforts to sort of capture some of this? Off the top of my head, I'm thinking like, yes, dairy program internally, water quality program internally, and then within DEC, Marley was just talking about the floodplain related connection, and some of the other A&R programs. Is there anything else that we should maybe draft another individual to represent, or folks feel comfortable with those sort of being the scope of that?
So not everyone is here, I'll say that, Nina. So there are going to be some people that will have to email out afterwards and see which group they want to participate in. So you may have more. Other than that, I defer to the rest of the group because I don't have any suggestions for you off the top of my head.
Well, I can think of John, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to say to Julie and Travis, I know you're in the farmer empowerment group. I may be able to recommend some persons from Extension to be inclusive as well.
Sorry, last question, then you can move on, Nicole. I think sometimes it's hard for us to separate the word regulatory from like CFR regulations that, dictate FSA programming. So is the expectation that government services is going to cover basically the disaster assistance programs and the related recommendations, and the regulatory group will focus on specifically like regulations that apply to farms that are coming up as we, work through response and recovery efforts?
That is my understanding and vision of
Okay.
it.
Okay, yeah, and Steve, that would be great. Maybe we could pull Hannah in just to help us out. Thanks.
Sounds good. I think that's a good idea, Nina. And I'll check with her to make sure she's okay with it, but I think she will be.
So the identifying group members actually went faster than I anticipated. So we're a bit ahead of schedule, which is not a bad thing. Any other questions before we move on to next steps?
Nicole, maybe these are your next steps, sorry, but what's the
No, you're good.
timeline for this, for these subgroups?
So right now, we're looking to have you all meet, I would say in the next week or two, and touch base and kind of talk out how you see a path forward for identifying priorities in each group. But ultimately, I would like to do a report out in our November meeting, which I believe is the 14th? I'm looking right now.
Nicole, what's your question? Sorry, maybe I can help.
So Marley's question was around what is the timeline for this? And
Yeah.
my answer is that in the next couple of weeks, I'd like the subgroups to at least connect and develop kind of path forward on making recommendations. And then I am trying to find when our next ag recovery
It's
task force
it's
meeting is.
November
15th.
It's November 15.
9 o'clock on the 15th.
Yeah.
So we can do a report out on the 15th. I don't necessarily expect to everything be completely, perfect and settled. I think have the priorities, have had the discussion. After having the subgroup discussion, perhaps have some follow-up through email or shared documents, and then I think we start the report out and have a conversation about what each group has talked about next month. So I guess the timeline is between now and November 15th. Having identified subgroup priorities. I don't expect folks to do anything with the main spreadsheet. I expect that to be more of an overall task force job. All right. At this point, I don't know if others have specific topics they wanted to bring up, or Roy, if you have other next steps, but Marley kind of queued me up really well. That's what I wanted to talk about, is what our expectation was for the subgroups, and then going forward, what we expect for folks to have prepared for next meeting, which is really just a report out of what the top short-term, long-term goals were developed by each subgroup.
Right, I'm on the same page. I do think that there are folks in Extension who would love to sit on all of these committees to share some expertise in some way. So by all means, reach out to them. And if you're having some challenges identifying people, let me know, and I'll try to be as helpful as I can.
So if there is nothing else that folks want to talk about today, I'm fine to adjourn early. Liz?
Hey, sorry, I feel like I have a lot of questions today. And
That's
then someone from the census came to the door, so I actually missed that whole discussion on what we're supposed to be discussing. So are you gonna send us the list of people and contacts for each group? And Roy, your question of including other people beyond folks that are sort of listed on this call, do we have sort of, as a group leader person, do I have purview to sort of reach out to anyone else that makes good sense to include in those small groups?
I would think so. But yeah, but you'll receive something from us about who is the point person for each of these tasks, and hopefully, if you have other people in mind, in extension, I'd be happy to talk to you more about that.
Thanks. Yeah, I was thinking of inviting a few folks from Mark Canella's team.
Yep.
And yeah, let's reconnect about others as well. Thank you.
Okay, so I will get each group assignment out to you all. It's probably going to be a couple days because I'm going to reach out to the members of the task force that weren't able to make it today and get them assigned to a group. I will also identify the point people, and I will write out some expectations for you all so that you don't feel like you have to remember all that. But ultimately, it'll just be the charge of the point person to get a meeting scheduled with the subgroup, and then identify from there how you're going to work to ultimately identify your short and long-term goals for the group. Okay. Liz, do you have another question, or is your hand just from before? Just want to make sure that.
Hand, sorry.
That's okay. All right, well, thank you all so much. This is much appreciated. I will also be getting the workbook out to you all with the work group information. So thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.